to Just Plain Wrong, the podcast where three Mennonite librarians discuss depictions of Amish and Mennonites in popular culture. I'm Abby, and today we'll be discussing the book An Unlikely Amish Match by Vanetta Chapman, which should not be confused with An Unlikely Amish Match by Joanne Brown or An Unlikely Amish Match by Beth Wiseman. But before we get into the book, let's chat about phones. Cell phones seem to be everywhere these days, and Micah, our Amish Bachelor of the Week, is no exception. He has to hide his phone use from his strict grandfather, but he still finds time to Snapchat. This, of course, ends up causing issues for him. So how about you, Erin and Tilly? Do you have any phone-related incidents to share?
It took me a long time to come up with an incident, but today I remembered that very recently I sent my first pocket tweet. So without realizing it, I had replied to someone on Twitter, and my message just said the letter B, as, saw, and then sorry, just a string of incoherent letters, QVDV. So that was fun, but it also reminded me of this amazing incident that happened, I think like 6 or 7 years ago, in which a Goshen College professor, who I won't name, accidentally started a Facebook group in her pocket and was very busy that day, so did not realize that she had done this. And I was one of the very blessed 8 or 9 people that was randomly added to this Facebook group that was just named E. And I literally only knew one other person in this group. And so throughout the day, we were sending messages like, what is going on? Why did she add us to this group? And the professor didn't realize it till much later, and it was very funny. But to this day, the group remains active. We don't send messages very often, but at least one person in the group must have it like bookmarked on their calendar. And so every year someone says a happy anniversary message to the entire group. So while that was not my mistake, it's one of my favorite cell phone stories.
That's great. I do have to ask, was both the group called E, and then did all of you have like a name that began with E or something, or was it just E?
I think most of us either had a first initial or last initial that was an E, but not everyone. It was a very random.
Wow,
very random.
That's intense.
It was funny. Great.
How about you, Tilly?
Well, I had an incident, I think it was my first year of college, where I lost my phone. I couldn't figure out if I had left it in a gathering space or in a classroom. So I posted something on Facebook, please bring my phone back if you've seen it, and went to bed. And in the morning I woke up and my phone was magically on my pillow. And I thought, that's really weird that someone could get onto my floor and get into my room and just put this here. But I mean, I guess I'm glad it's back. So I asked around to find out who had returned it to me, and it turned out someone had found it in a couch cushion and recognized that one of my friends in my contacts list, and called her, and she, who was on my floor, and came in, kind of knocked on my door middle of the night and said, I found your phone. And apparently I said, yay, and then clapped, and then accepted the phone, and then rolled over in bed. And I didn't remember any of this. It was just magic to wake up with my phone. It's not my only sleep talking incident, I've discovered later, but it's one of my earliest.
That's great.
That's fantastic. My story is that my husband is an avid talk-to-text user, which means autocorrect is not always his friend. His latest, and I would perhaps even say greatest text to me, was as follows. At clinic for meetings, will be home by 4:30 with human teeth and cat. So he meant to say cumin seeds and kids, but autocorrect was not his friend. So I was highly amused. I will say, at least on one other occasion, the unfortunate combination of talk to text and the name Abby meant that I got a text from him that said, "Hey, Daddy," in reference to me, which I wasn't pleased with, but This is the price you pay for talk to text. Anyways, well, let's get into the book. This book, An Unlikely Amish Match, is the 5th in Vanetta Chapman's Indiana Amish Bride series, and it is set in Goshen, which was our primary reason for picking this book. While we are not experts in all things Goshen and Amish, we have lived in Goshen for a combined, we had to do the math, a combined 40 years, which I feel like gives us some backing for that. So we definitely wanted to see what the author would get right and what she would get wrong. Spoiler alert, after reading the book, we are fairly certain she has never been to Goshen, but we will get into that more. So before we talk about the issues with this book, here is a quick summary. Susanna Byler has survived cancer at a young age. This leaves her with both a serious outlook on life and the inability to have biological children, which she is sure means she will never marry. Micah Fisher is the cute bad boy who moves in with his grandparents who live next to the Byler farm. Micah wears jeans, carries a phone, and is clearly out to break hearts. In a noble effort to save the hearts and virtue of her female friends, Susanna talks Micah into dating her. Micah starts to shape up and take responsibility. He even starts a new business, which we will talk about later on. And their dates quickly escalate into love. But will their newfound love survive Micah being sent to jail due to false accusations, a tornado, and a relative's heart attack? I should note that all of those occur in approximately 24 hours. Obviously, we think there are a few issues with this book. However, let's start by talking about what we thought worked in this novel. What parts did you like? What seemed accurate? Did you enjoy it? So, Tilly, why don't you start?
I liked the relationship dynamics in this book. I thought they were, especially in comparison to some of our others, where I was like, oh man, you guys are going to have trouble down the road. I actually thought that the temperaments of Susanna and Micah were fairly well matched. It's a old conflict of, someone who's like super practical and down to earth and maybe a little pessimistic, meeting someone who's more optimistic and happy and joyous, and they find each other and these things balance out. So even though you could see it coming, it was nice to see that, because it felt like both characters were growing up and having a better life. And there were some times where it was like, okay, I feel like you guys should be reading the writing on the wall a little clearer and sooner than you should have. But, I thought that they reacted fairly rationally to all of the problems that they faced. It wasn't all miscommunication.
So yeah, I did appreciate how in this book, community seemed to play a larger role. Susanna's parents and Micah's grandparents were a part of their lives in what felt like more meaningful ways and helped them both figure out themselves. I feel like in other books, families are often the meddling nuisance or the thing to be overcame, or sometimes absent entirely, which is especially strange given that Amish families are known for being both large and very close-knit. And additionally, I also felt like Susanna's experience with cancer was treated respectfully, if superficially. And I could kind of see how Susanna's issues, due to her infertility, of kind of viewing herself as damaged goods. The book kind of blames a lot of this on the fact that her boyfriend, who was dating her during the cancer episode, dumped her once it was revealed that she could not have children. That said, I think I am also ready to move past the trope of beautiful, skilled, caring, intelligent women who are convinced that no one will ever love them. That's maybe getting a little old. But how about you, Erin? What did you think?
I also honed in on a trope, and it was kind of one I was surprised that I liked. So unlike most of the books we've read so far, this one used a fairly common romance trope, in that they sort of were fake pretend, not really lovers. And then, obviously, what's going to happen, like 3 hangouts in, they're like falling for each other. She really only starts to date Micah because she wants to save her friends from him. And I sort of wanted the trope to play out a bit longer. I found the characters' interactions to be pretty entertaining. And I thought the first half of the book, as just a standard romance novel, was pretty good. The second half of the book, which really became very plot driven and frankly ridiculous, I still loved because it was very entertaining. But it was a very stark contrast to the first half of the book, which I thought was the development of a pretty good romance.
Well, that segues nicely into our next question. What did you think of the characters in this book? How did you feel about how Micah and Susanna were depicted? And Erin, let's come back to you to start.
Okay. So yeah, I just gave this book a fair amount of praise, but I was really frustrated with how Micah was depicted. So he's 25 years old, but the way he's portrayed in the book, I would have honestly thought he was 16 or 17 if they hadn't explicitly said his age multiple times. So as a bit of background, he's the youngest of 7 siblings and was apparently very spoiled. One quote from the book, and this is Micah's words: "He never washed a dish or helped prepare a meal. If he suddenly had to cook for himself, he'd probably perish from starvation. The family treated him as if he was a special gift left on the doorstep Christmas morning." And again, that's maybe cute if you're 14 or 15, but you're 25, and I don't know. I just found it really frustrating on 2 levels. One, it's that sort of like man boy trope thing that like you only get to be fun loving and carefree if you are an attractive white male. And also, you're 25. Like, quit complaining about being sent to Goshen to live with your grandparents. Like, you don't have to do anything if you don't want to because you are a grown adult. So, I mean, I wrestled with that because I don't know. I'm curious what you guys thought of that. It really annoyed me in a book that I otherwise really enjoyed.
That's a really good point. I think I had kind of glossed over the 25, so I don't think I had realized just how kind of a little ridiculous it is that he gets forced to move halfway across the country to stay with his grandparents and doesn't have any choice in the matter as a 25-year-old. Because yeah, that seems like something you would do to like a 16 or 17-year-old. So that's a really good point. Yeah, what's up, Micah? Get it together.
Get a job, man. Learn how to cook. It's not that hard.
How about you, Julie?
Yeah, I'd echo that. As I said earlier, I really liked that the dynamic of someone being lighthearted and fun-loving being matched with someone a little bit more practical and down to earth, because it implies that people can be well-rounded, that together they'll grow and they will both be happy and they will both be practical, and that these things aren't exclusive. But I was frustrated that the fun-loving part of this relationship had to be the man, and that I don't know. I don't find helplessness in adult men to be cute. So, it's one thing to be like, I need space. I need to be on my own. And a new environment in Goshen might make me be more independent and make some decisions that I've been putting off. It's another thing to be like, I don't pity him. There was zero pity there for like his grandfather getting him up at like 4 a.m. to do stuff, or people expecting him to do work. So like there's this one moment where he like realizes that he hasn't said thank you to his grandmother, and he's helping her dry the dishes, and she's so grateful. And I'm just like, this poor woman has to put up with you. And I feel like they've been telling you. Like, I feel like there's a talk with the grandfather when he first arrives in Goshen, and the grandfather's like, this is going to be a hard living because you've been spoiled and you need to learn how to do these things as an adult. And Micah's just sort of like, I don't understand what people want from me. they just told you they want you to contribute. So, overall, generally liked the character development, even though I wish Micah didn't need it.
Indeed. Okay, well, clearly there were some issues in this book. So what didn't this book get right? And Tilly, let's have you start this off for us.
Okay. The first thing that I noticed were the names. And Byler and Fisher are in fact Amish names, but when I first heard them, my gut just said, these are not the names of Northern Indiana. So I decided to double check, and I went to the handy dandy Amish directory at the Mennonite Historical Library. And yeah, these names don't fit here. Out of the 23,000 Amish people living in Elkhart County, which is the county where Goshen is, as well as some other highly Amish areas, I guess, there are only 3 Fisher families and 9 Byler families. And Byler is spelled differently than it is in this book. It's with a Y and not an EI. And this is in contrast to like the 200 plus Yoder families or the 300, almost 400 plus Miller families. So it seemed like she just like found a list of Amish names and was like, this will work. When Mennonite and Amish names are quite regional. Like it's not uncommon for people to have a last name and for you to immediately be like, oh, they're from Manitoba. So the names, you know, they got it half right. The other issue I found was with the business that Micah is apparently clever enough to invent, which is an Amish taxi. So Micah's business involves him borrowing a buggy from a widow who doesn't use it, and then he gives her a portion of the money that he earns taking Amish people around and English tourists around. And I mean, I guess there's nothing that says that this couldn't happen, but it just doesn't seem likely. If you're an Amish person and you really need to get around, you can bike, walk, borrow someone else's buggy from family or friend, or for big trips, like for getting groceries or if you need to pick up supplies somewhere in town, you can hire a ride in a car or a van. And slang for English drivers who take Amish people around, we say that they're hauling Amish or that they are a Yoder toter, which I still find hilarious. You know, a buggy is not the most efficient way for an Amish person to get around. If you have to pay for a ride, you're probably paying for a car. And there are instances of Amish people who hang out in tourist areas and give rides to tourists in exchange for money. But I talked to Joe Springer, the curator at the Mennonite Historical Library, about this. And he says that, to his knowledge, they have only ever been retired men who are interested in like a little bit of extra income. These buggy ride services tend to be in places where there are more tourists who have come for an Amish experience. So places like Shipshewana or Middlebury. And why Goshen is sort of in Amish country, it doesn't actually get a whole lot of tourists looking for the Amish experience. So the idea that Micah could set up shop at the old bag factory and actually get enough custom to make Amish taxi worth it just doesn't click.
Excellent. Yes, many good points about why there is not an Amish taxi service in Goshen. Yeah, stunner with that one. So how about you, Erin? What did you think they got right and what did you think was wrong?
Well, I'm going to focus my comments mostly on her portrayal of Goshen. So to just reiterate a little of what Tilly was saying, like there's not even really Uber or real taxis in Goshen because of the way it's spread out, and it's just not logistically, it's just not a place where you can get people where they need to go and make enough money to like have that be an option. And that's even with a car. So in a buggy, it just doesn't work. Stuff is too spread out. She liked to name drop, and I do give her some props. She at least looked at a map and she mentioned, I believe, LaGrange and Shipshewana, but as places that he would potentially be taking people in his buggy, which they're just way too far. Like that would take hours. And if you've ever ridden in a buggy, they're not comfortable and they can be very cold in the winter. But I did appreciate the local references. So along with mentioning towns, she mentioned Cabin Coffee, which is a coffee shop, JoJo's Pretzels, which is a few stores, one of which is in Goshen. And then the old bag factory was mentioned. Those are the ones I noticed. She also mentions the Goshen News, but I want to note that I found her portrayal of the news people to be troubling. And this was also one of those plots that felt very weird and shoehorned in and totally unnecessary. So at one point, Micah takes a picture, and long story short, it ends up on the front page of the Goshen News. And then the Goshen News knows about him, and they show up with the news van in his grandparents' front yard. And his grandparents, being older Amish, are not thrilled about this. And people who live and work around Amish communities tend to know how to interact with the Amish. So it's not very likely that a reporter with any familiarity with the Amish at all would show up and shove a camera in their faces. Like, that just wouldn't happen. So those were the things about Goshen that I noticed. Like Abby said in the intro, it was pretty clear that she hasn't actually been to Goshen. She just chose this as her place and looked at some maps and maybe the Wikipedia article.
Yes, I very much agree. So the one I wanted to focus on, so a little bit of background, in the midst of tying up all these plot lines that happen in about 24 hours, Chapman also throws a tornado at Micah and Susanna, rather literally, like the tornado is like chasing them across a field. So while tornadoes are very common in Indiana, she gets a lot of things very wrong. So just a little bit, I'm going to lay the scene a little bit. So they are at Susanna's farm, and she has two much younger sisters. And so the three of them and Micah are hanging out. And I think it was Micah says he wants to go to a nearby creek. They have some misgivings about that because I think at this point they can already tell a storm is coming. But despite this, they go off to the creek and are hanging out in the creek when all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a surprise tornado funnel comes down and chases them madly into a nearby derelict barn. The barn collapses on them. They do not die. Then they return to Susanna's house, which is apparently about half of it is removed. So there are a number of issues with this. First of all, Susanna has lived in Goshen her whole life. You do not do that and not know the signs of a possible tornado coming. You can see it in the sky. You can sometimes even feel it in the air. And there's also plenty of other warning signs.
And I noticed this when I reread the chapter before our podcast. They imply that Micah's the one who knows about tornadoes.
They are, and she bothers to fact check the date that there were tornadoes in Maine. And he's like, it only took my one experience with tornadoes in Maine for me to know this, as opposed to someone who would probably at least experience a tornado warning like at least once every summer. So like, I feel like Susanna should be the more prepared one.
Yes.
Very much so. With all of this, again, it's Micah is in charge of their tornado safety, and he makes some very bad decisions. So just in general, if you were wondering to yourself, let's say you have ignored all the signs and a tornado sneaks up on you, which again, they're loud, like very, very loud. They do not sneak up on you. But let's just say one hit. If you have a choice between running to a low creek bed or a shoddily constructed, falling apart farm across or a barn across a field, the creek would be a much better place to go. But no, they run to the barn where they take shelter. And what does amaze me is like the scene is like they're very, it's very intense. They're running across the field. The funnel's just a few feet behind them. It's coming for them. It's coming for them. They make it in the barn. They shut the door. Like the door is going to help at that point. They shut the door behind them. The barn collapses and somehow they're fine. Like one of the sisters gets injured, but they're fine. Not a big deal. Anyways, the other part that I loved is they get the whole way back to Susanna's house. And Susanna's house has been like severely damaged. And somehow this turns into like Micah being the hero because they're like, oh, if we hadn't gone to the creek, if we had been at home, we would have all died. Look at that house. It's so badly so badly damaged. No, this is the Midwest. You would have been safe and sound in the root cellar or the basement. You would have been fine because that's where you go in case of a tornado. So I just ranted a lot, but I would love, what did you guys think? Are there other things you want to add about tornado safety in case our listeners have any?
I have a quote to read.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I also yelled at my book during this scene. So this is part of the tornado section. Susanna didn't know if it had been a good or bad idea to shelter in the decrepit barn, but there wasn't time to second-guess herself. There wasn't anywhere else to go. Her eyes met Micah's for a brief second, and she saw in there the same fear and yearning and love that she was feeling. So Susanna didn't know if it had been a good or bad idea. Of course it was a bad idea. You were next to the creek. And if the creek is too full of water, then just find a low-hanging depression. Just throw yourself on the ground and lie flat. Like, there are PSAs about this.
Well, if you weren't from Maine.
They yeah, maybe we should be blaming Micah for his taking action in ignorance.
He's the whole reason they were even on the picnic, is he insisted.
Yeah, so instead of being thankful that he saved them, they should be pissed that he almost killed them.
Agreed.
Have we mentioned tornado sirens yet?
No, go for it. Tornado sirens.
Like, yeah. So along with them really not being a surprise generally, they are loud and they come at the front end of storms, which are pretty obvious. Yeah, there's usually, and especially in a place like the Goshen area, test the tornado siren every Thursday at 2 p.m. because it's very loud. I will say that when it's very windy and potentially inclement weather that would have a tornado, it's often so windy you can't actually hear it. But there would have been sirens going if there was conditions ripe for a tornado. So theoretically, they would have heard something and had more warning. I also would say that, you know, he had his cell phone throughout the book. This was this thing of tension. And I had to sort of chuckle that, you know, of all the times to have the cell phone on, the tornado warning would have been a good one, because the last time I experienced a tornado warning, it, I think, hit at like 2 a.m. and our phones went absolutely berserk with all of the warnings coming through. So yeah, no surprise tornadoes.
So, anything else to add? Favorite scenes or other things that you want to make sure we mention or discuss?
We need to talk about the very random plot line where Micah ends up in jail for like 4 pages. And I still don't really know why. So Micah launches this taxi business, and then I don't know, I think the Goshen News incident happens. And then like 2 pages later, he's being picked up for questioning, and they say, we have you on camera robbing these stores. And he refuses to give an alibi, even though he says he has one. And then he ends up in jail for I don't know how long. And I still don't like, okay, so I think it existed as a plot point because it was supposed to show that he's grown by not like confessing what his alibi was, because that would have put someone else at risk. But it was weird.
Yeah, I did appreciate that, unlike other books that decide that if you're Amish, it's a get out of suspicion card, that the police will never question you. I did appreciate that the police were like, no, you're going to jail. We think you did this. So I feel like that was at least a positive thing. Yeah, but I agree with you. That was very convoluted. I did not understand what was happening.
And you could tell that this was like a moment where he's like, this is a repercussion. Like, he took a Snapchat of a barn raising, and then one of his friends screenshotted it and sent it to the newspaper. And then the newspaper tried to get a hold of him. And because they were aware of the taxi service, an Englisher knew about it, went to the widow's house, stole the buggy and the horse, rode the buggy to town at night, stole some stuff from a general store, and then presumably drove the buggy back. I was just like, what Englisher actually knows how to harness the horse anymore? Or drive around at night without good lighting? Or wants to take that long to rob a place? Like, they'd have to find the house, which they could do, but they'd have to get an Amish directory, find the house, make their way there, probably not walking, so their car is probably parked somewhere. Then they get into the buggy, which is probably in a barn, get a horse out and harness the horse, and then ride it all the way back to town to rob a general store.
You know, if this robber had just consulted Joe Springer, they could have come up with a much
more
better
efficient
plan. Yes, clearly oversight there. Any other scenes or things that we want to bring up before we do our final ratings?
I have one. Just
All
one.
right.
And this is, I've decided, the way that you know if someone truly loves you or not. It's that they're confessing, Micah and Susanna are confessing the love to one another in the last chapter. And he says something like, I learned how to sew from you. And Susanna's like, yeah, but you can't sew with crap. And then he tells her, stars in his eyes, Susanna, I'd be interested in alpacas if it meant I could spend more time with you.
Oh.
And Susanna says, I don't have any alpacas. And Micah says, not my point. It's just like, in addition to just being really strange, like, I don't, like, why alpacas? But it's just like, he just wants to spend so much time with you that even alpacas couldn't keep him away. Forget wild horses. It's those alpacas, man. So
It must
I
be
don't know.
love.
Girls, get you a man who is willing to tolerate alpacas for your presence.
All right. So how would we rate this? So let's use sneak tornado funnels for our scale. So Erin, how many of those sneaky tornado funnels would you give this book?
I really liked this book. I found it very enjoyable. It was fun because I thought the characters, again, I was annoyed at Micah, but I thought they were fairly developed characters. And yeah, the plot twist at the end, I'm looking at my notes here, and it went, launch the Amish business, the Goshen News shows up, sudden arrest, sudden release from jail, tornado, sick grandpa, which we haven't even mentioned, engagement, all crammed in the last half of a very short book. And I was very entertained. So I guess I would give it maybe 4 for overall enjoyment, and maybe slightly less if we're doing a separate accuracy scale. Just got a dinger for not quite getting the business idea and some of the Goshen details and the tornado thing. So maybe 3 for accuracy.
I think I'm about the same. I'd say for enjoyment, I was pretty amused the whole way through. Part of that was amusement was at the book's expense, but it was still amusement. So 4 out of 5 funnels for enjoyment. I thought the prose was actually pretty readable and enjoyable. Probably 3 out of 5 funnels for accuracy. She got a couple things, like she figured out somehow that Shipshi is the way that local people refer to Shipshawana. So she got that right. And she got the presence of like RV factories. And at one point, Micah contemplates going to work in an RV factory where, in fact, many Amish people do work. So I gave her like slight props for those. But still, the buggy thing's hard to get over.
Yeah, I think I would overall agree. I would actually, maybe considering this is the 5th in her Indiana Amish Brides series, there could be other ones. Like maybe we want to do an in-depth analysis of LaGrange via whatever she Googled about it. Okay. So finally, we want to wrap up with, we recently did a segment where we talked about the most Mennonite thing we did that week. So that inspired some of you to share your stories with us, which is fantastic. We love that. So we did want to share some of the ones that we heard. So Erin, take it away.
Yeah, so from Lisa K on Twitter, we got, I just emptied the last of the lotion from an old bottle into a newer one because the pump doesn't get the lotion all the way to the bottom and I didn't want to waste it. This one made me laugh pretty hard because on my desk, I have this like empty, it's not ice cream, but the stuff that comes in like a little plastic container. And it's just filled with like the last inch of, I don't know how many lotion bottles. It has a real gnarly smell to it, all the different scents. So Lisa, I feel ya. I'm the same way. And then Johanna on Facebook said today that she makes her own laundry detergent, which feels Mennonite, but then to be extra Mennonite, she keeps it in the freezer so that it lasts an extra long time. So pro tip, keep your homemade laundry detergent in the freezer. I didn't know that one.
Probably the most Mennonite thing I did this week was I threw out a pair of shoes, which is not very Mennonite. But before I did that, I took the insoles out and put them into a different pair of shoes.
Good work.
So, if you can't donate them and they're not worth keeping, there's still probably something worth keeping. I also took out the shoelaces just in case. I don't know what I'll do.
Okay, you buried the lead there.
You
buried the lead there, Tilly. Do you have a jar of used shoelaces that you
I don't. I just threw them in with my socks.
I can honestly say I've never done that. I've never even thought about saving the shoelaces.
It felt wrong to throw them away.
Wow. That's fantastic. So I have just learned a lot this episode. So that wraps up this week's discussion on An Unlikely Amish Match by Vanetta Chapman. And next week, we will be discussing A Sister's Wish by Shelley Shepherd Gray. So if you want to read along, check your local library or purchase a copy if you'd like to read it. Additionally, we do really love to hear from you. So if you would like to share, what is the most Mennonite thing you did this past week? And you don't have to be Mennonite to participate. We'd also be interested if anyone has any good tornado stories. Has a tornado funnel snuck up on you? If so, we really want to hear about that. You can email us at plainwrongpod@gmail.com. And by popular demand, you can also find us on Facebook. We now have a Facebook page in addition to our Instagram and Twitter. And all three of those have the handle Plain Wrong Pod. So as always, thank you for listening. And if you feel so inclined, rate, review, or subscribe. Thanks again.